Every single year, a top-tier draft prospect suddenly falls down the board, and unexpectedly, the Eagles have a chance at that player. Who could be those prospects this year? We'll get into it on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Welcome into a Friday edition of the show. We are brought to you today by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first month. You know, I hear it every single offseason. I'll see mock drafts where somebody has the Eagles taking this player in the 20 to 30th range because that's where they've been picking for the last decade. And I always see people respond on X and say, there's no chance that player is available at that pick. Like, they're going to go way earlier. They'd have to do a massive trade up to have a chance at that prospect. I hear it every single year, and every single season, there's at least one or two prospects that you're like, wow, I thought that guy was going to be a top 5 pick, a top 10 pick, a top 15 pick, and suddenly here are the Eagles looking at an opportunity to land that player. Maybe not with their pick, although that's happened, like last year, when they found Quinyon Mitchell just sitting in their lap at their actual pick. They didn't even have to trade up. I thought Quinyon Mitchell was going to be a top 10, at least a top 15 selection, and boom, he falls into the 20s. Every single year that happens, and maybe it's at the top of the draft too. Everybody thought Jalen Carter would be a top 3, top 5 selection, and he falls to the 9th overall selection. Every single year this happens despite what people tell you. So that's why I always say, if you do a mock draft and you post it and somebody says that's not realistic, then they're ridiculous. Don't listen to that person, because the draft is one of the most unpredictable things in sports that you can try to analyze. And I think it's going to happen this year. There will be players yet again where some teams don't like their off the field things. They might not like their position when it comes to what position they would play. Maybe you can't figure out what position they would play. Maybe they're not a big fan of their physical upside. Maybe they're not a big fan of their college production. Every team's process is different. And that's why these players that sometimes the media and the fans, the consensus of that group of people think they're going to go earlier, but the NFL does things differently, and suddenly unexpected things happen in the NFL draft. Here are 5 players I think could unexpectedly be in the Eagles' range. And it might not be with a 32nd overall pick. It might be in the form of a trade up inside the pick 20 to 31 range, right? You might have to move up the board, but at least within striking distance of Howie Roseman. Like, I think if you say he falls to the 10th overall pick, I don't think that's realistic for Howie to move up 22 spots up the board unless he's giving up a future first-round pick and more, which maybe he would consider doing with all his draft picks in the future, but I doubt it. But maybe it's from like pick 17 to 31. Here are some players that I think there's a chance. Again, there's a chance that they could fall. Number 1, Tennessee edge rusher James Pearce Jr. I think James Pearce is the most obvious fall candidate because when you look at him, I think there's a lot of people saying the same thing. There are off-the-field concerns with Pearce that could make him fall down the board. And we've seen this in Philadelphia happen to one of their prospects, Jalen Carter. And that was some tangible evidence of, something concerning that you could actually say is a reason an NFL team, justifiably so, wouldn't want to take that player. But with James Pearce, I've sniffed around this. I've talked to people that are close to the Tennessee organization. I've talked to some reporters that would have sources on James Pearce, and everybody keeps telling me the same thing. Yeah, there's concerns there with the off the field. I saw this guy run a 4 in the 4.4s in the NFL Combine. I saw this guy just test out of this world at the Combine when it comes to his vertical, when it comes to the shuttle drills, and just seeing his lateral quickness, his long-range speed, his power. And you look at his tape, and it reflects that ability. And so everyone keeps saying, yeah, he might not be a top 10, top 15 pick, though, because of this off-the-field stuff. And I keep trying to find what the specific things people are concerned about with his off the field. Like, is there an issue? Is there something that happened? Is there like a case that could be forming against him? What is it? Like, because with Jalen Carter, we knew it was about the drag racing and the accident that happened. Like, there was something legitimately there that you had to debate your comfortableness with. Your comfortability, I should say. With Pearce, all I've heard is there's concerns, but nobody has given me any specifics. And then somebody did and said people are concerned about his maturity level. If that's all it is right now, I would be comfortable taking James Pearce. And I've seen some mock drafts that have him falling outside the top 20. And if that's the case, I saw a mock draft where the Eagles took him at 32nd overall. I don't think he falls to 32. But if he falls outside that top 16, top 20 range, I'm going all in to go get James Pearce. And so I'm comfortable with it because right now I've tried to do my own research and I can't find anything. Maybe there is something specific, but if it's just immaturity, I don't know. I'm willing to take the risk on that kind of talent. And I've heard nothing from players themselves. In fact, I heard Tennessee's quarterback say what a good teammate he was over the years. So I haven't heard anything of real weight that makes me uncomfortable taking James Pearce. But I think, again, players have fallen for less. And I think James Pearce, when a lot of people say he could fall, you should believe that it's a possibility. Could you make the justification he's a top 10 pick? Absolutely. He has top 10 talent. But because of this mysterious off-the-field stuff, he could fall. I think he's the number one fall candidate for the Eagles. The second guy here, I think it's more based on his position than talent, is Georgia safety Malachi Starks. And again, all of these players that are on this list, I think, have top 10, top 15 talent. They shouldn't fall outside the top 20, and the odds are probably they don't fall. But again, every single year, there are players that do. I could see Malachi Starks falling if there is let's say there's a huge run. Let's say both quarterbacks go with the first two picks, Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders. Let's say a couple receivers go, like McMillan goes and Travis Hunter, and maybe there's a couple corners. And this year, it's stacked with offensive line and defensive line talent. Maybe there's a huge run on linemen. You have, I think, 2 tight ends that could go inside the top 20, and Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. There's a chance that maybe nobody, even though they love Malachi Starks, they don't want to take a safety with that pick. I think other people were saying to me that Nick Emenwari wouldn't even be possible for the Eagles with the 32nd overall selection. Do you think 2 safeties are going to go inside the top 20, top 25? Maybe. I mean, Starks and Emenwari have that kind of talent, have that kind of upside. But if you were to tell me that one of these 2 safeties, and specifically here in this discussion, Starks were to fall within a small trade-up range for the Eagles or even fell to the 32nd overall pick, I wouldn't be surprised. It's more based on position than anything, but this is a loaded class at very important positions, and teams every single year can talk themselves into taking a lineman, and I think that could happen. So I think Malachi Starks is a legitimate possibility. Maybe more so Nick Emenwari is more realistic, but I could totally see Starks just based on what position he plays. And then number 3, Texas A&M edge rusher Shamar Stewart has the talent of anybody in this class, if not more, superior when it comes to physical gifts. I mean, he tested incredibly this year at the combine. Like, the upside, if you love a traitsy kind of player like this, like I do, Shamar Stewart's your guy. I could totally see a team talking themselves into Shamar Stewart with a top 10 pick. He'll likely be a top 15 selection, but there is that college production aspect of this that if a team does prioritize that or they do value it, Shamar Stewart, the numbers don't back up the talent. And that doesn't concern me. That's not a huge part of my evaluation process. But for other teams, it definitely is. And when you look at like his run stops, when you look at his run defense numbers, they're not good. So I could see just based on just the raw talent, the lack of production, that it scares some people off in a class where there are other options. Like Shamar Stewart's not the best of a really bad group. He's a very talented, filled with potential type of prospect in a group, though, where there's a lot of options. And you might say, we like Shamar Stewart, but Mikael Williams has that athleticism and he's got the production. James Pearce, we'd rather deal with whatever these off-the-field concerns are and go for that kind of talent than Shamar Stewart. I think based on that lack of production, that is something that could spook off teams in a very deep edge class. So I think Shamar Stewart is a fall candidate as well. Then number 4, Georgia linebacker Jalen Walker. This is very much like Cooper DeJean, where maybe teams just can't figure out what he is at the next level. Is he an edge rusher? Is he a stand-up linebacker? Is he a tweener? Is he really great at either? Is he a jack of all trades but a master of none? I think the Eagles and other teams value that kind of versatility and see it as a strength. I know I do, but I think other teams might not see it that way. They might see it the opposite way of, we don't know where he would play. You might get some Isaiah Simmons PTSD and just say, like, he might not fit in at any really one spot, and so he's a role player long term. I think Jalen Walker can be an elite edge rusher that stands up and you can use him in blitz situations, going through the A and B gap. I don't think he's a stand-up coverage linebacker ever. I think we all know he's a pass rusher. I think his ceiling is he's a poor man's Micah Parsons. Like, that's the style of player he is. But I think based on the struggle to figure out what exactly he'll play at the next level full time, that maybe, again, in a deep class, teams might prefer just a more classic hand in the dirt edge rusher like a James Pearce. So I think in that way, that could have Jalen Walker fall. Again, I'm not predicting any of these guys are falling down the board. I think most of these players will likely be top 10, top 15 selections. But every year, there's at least one or two players where you say, how did they end up falling past the top 20 range? How'd they fall to 25, to 29, to 32? It happens every year. These are 5 guys that I think it could happen to. James Pearce Jr., Malachi Starks, Shamar Stewart, Jalen Walker, and then Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolan. I love Walter Nolan's explosiveness, his pass rush ability. I think he has a high motor, but it's a really deep defensive tackle class. Pick your poison. Again, based on a really deep class, there are going to be some good linemen that in other years, like last season, would have been a top 15, top 20 pick, that this year are more in that 25 to 32 range. And I think Walter Nolan is another one of those players. Sometimes for the Eagles, just sitting tight and not making a trade is the right move, because sometimes players like this fall. They might have to make a trade up to get one of these guys, but did you think Nolan Smith was just going to be there sitting for them at pick 31 2 years ago? I know I didn't. Did you think that last year Quinyon Mitchell would just be sitting for them at that pick without having to trade up? I didn't. So it happens every single year. And if a player falls to you, don't make a trade just for the sake of making a trade and trade down. If you like the player, stick and pick. And if these guys are available in a reasonable trade-up range, I think you go get them. Because, again, you have a lot of draft picks, projected to have 20 in the next 2 upcoming draft classes. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This topic kind of got me thinking, discussing who will be available. And every year we say this guy won't be there, this guy will. And the opposite happens. Predicting the NFL draft, I think it's very hard to do. And yet there's this almost arrogance to it by some. I think every single year we're supposed to learn these draft lessons, and we really don't. I want to talk about that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives business flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates will be there to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK, Upwork.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. And guys, today's show is also sponsored by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Well, between dining out, which is my big thing, same with online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO gives you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in just one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much money I was spending on food delivery. That's a huge bugaboo for me. Now I budget smarter and I save a whole lot more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, guys, so every single year I hear this. I hear certain draft takes. I hear that this player X, will not be available at the 20th overall selection, at the 30th pick, at the 32nd pick. And every year, that's proven to be false. And now I'm not predicting, like you saw those 5 players in segment 1 that I said are legitimate fall candidates for the Eagles, like a James Pearce, a Malachi Starks, Shamar Stewart, Jalen Walker, Walter Nolan. Odds are those guys probably don't come close to that 32nd overall pick. But every single year, the opposite happens. I thought Nolan Smith was going to be a top 15 pick in 2023, and he fell to the 30th, or was it the 31st pick? I don't know if Miami had to forfeit a first that year, but it was one of the two. He fell into the 30s. Quinyon Mitchell, I thought, was a slam dunk top 10, top 12 pick last year as the number 1 corner on the board. He fell outside the top 20. So every year this happens, and it's not just that, but I've been seeing a lot on draft Twitter, or draft X, I guess you could say, this offseason, where it's kind of frustrating the arrogance almost of draft Twitter, or just of draft culture, where you think this is the way it works. This is always what's going to happen. These are the kind of players that pan out. This is the way the first round works. And every single year, the regular season comes by, and we see things go different than we imagined. We see how unexpected the draft happens, then what prospects actually pan out. And you would think that we would learn these lessons. Okay, next year we're not going to fall for all these draft narratives, right? And yet every single year, it's like nobody does learn that, and all of the same rhetoric continues to happen. Like year after year, this happens, and it's happening again. And like that's what I've seen a lot on people's mock drafts is, oh, that guy's not going to be available. And it's not just that, but every single year, this is my biggest draft pet peeve. Every single damn year, everybody says you're not supposed to draft for need. You take the best player available. The bad teams draft for need. And yet every single year, the Eagles and every other team draft for need. Nobody just takes the best player available on their board. Nobody does that. Nobody. I think you can take the best player. Some teams will take the best player available based on their needs, but it's not just as, the draft isn't as black and white as people make it seem. I don't think anybody just drafts for need either. There's so many variables that go into a pick. Yeah, your best player is available on your board. That is a huge part of this. You don't just take a player because you need a cornerback. If a cornerback is 15 spots lower on your board than a tight end, but corner is a bigger need, you don't take the corner. You don't reach and take a need. But also, how stupid would it be, like if you're the Eagles and you have Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean already on your football team, or you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Jahan Dotson already in this football team, and you say, well, we have a safety 3 spots below this receiver who's at the top of our board. But hey, the receiver is the best player available. He's the best player left, so we're going to take that receiver. Even though we have 2 and at least 2, maybe 3 long-term pieces at that position already on your team, nobody should do that. That's as irresponsible as reaching for a need. Why would you take the best player available if they're not going to be playing for 2 to 3 years, or they might not even be guaranteed a long-term starting job? Rookie contracts are so crucial, so valuable in the NFL nowadays to get inexpensive, high-end play out of a rookie deal that I think wasting them with multiple redshirt seasons, if not more, is a waste of an asset. Like, I don't mind 1 redshirt year if you know the guy's going to start in year 2, like Cam Jurgens or Nakobe Dean. But to me, I would almost not take a player in the first round, the first 2 rounds, if I think there's no chance that guy's a starter in the first 2 years. That guy would be off my board. And so that's something else that just drives me nuts, is the BPA versus need discussion. The other thing, too, is like depth of the class. We'll go into it. It's like, hey, yeah, this edge rusher is a few spots below this linebacker, but linebacker is a really deep class. We could take this edge rusher that's like 3 or 4 spots lower on our board. It's also a more valuable position, and then we can come back around. Like the combo of this edge rusher and the linebacker we get the next round is going to be a better combo than taking just the BPA linebacker here and then coming back around with a weaker edge class. So, see what I mean? Like there's so much that goes into a draft pick. It's not just best player available. It's not just need. It's positional value. It's the depth of the class. It's maybe like you're trying to fit a certain style of player into your team. Scheme has a big part of this too. Coaching. There's so much that goes into it. Like, who fits a Vic Fangio type of defense? What does Vic Fangio want in a player? That matters too. So I've been seeing a lot of draft talk still, and it's like every year these narratives are proven to be incorrect, and yet we still just keep forcing them down people's throats. Also, like judging a player based on where they go to school. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell was a Rookie of the Year finalist, and he went to Toledo. Yeah, more players from Georgia and Alabama pan out than guys from the MAC or the FCS. Like, yeah, that's true. Like the North Dakota. But it's 2025. Are we really judging a player still based on what logo's on their helmet? Or even like reading too much into off-season workouts. We still do this where a player's tape is great, but they don't test out that well at the combine or their pro day. And people say, well, that's concerning. Like, that's going to lower them on my rankings. Or a player clearly doesn't play as fast on tape as he runs in the 40, but he clocks in at a 4.28, 4.29, and you say, well, boom, like there he goes. Like, that guy's going to skyrocket up the board. And yet we all still fall for this kind of stuff every year. And I'm not just like attacking fans or media. Teams do this too. Like, teams fall for this every single year. I remember watching the Giants Hard Knocks last year, and when they were doing like a mock draft, preparing for the draft, I never felt so smart in my life because I'm like, I could do this job. They're literally doing what we do on the podcast. They're reading into things the same way as everybody else. So, I don't know. Sorry, this was just me getting on my soapbox here for a segment, but I had to do it. Rant over, but can we just get rid of some of this draft rhetoric, like some of these narratives? And they're based off of real, tangible things. Like, you know, in the past, these things have been important and teams have gone about it this way. But I think we've seen in the NFL that almost anything can work in the draft. Any type of quarterback prospect can pan out. This player, if he doesn't fit this one, traditional box, I don't think that means he's not going to pan out. I wish it was more open-minded still with the draft process. You would think we would be there at this point, especially with analytics and RAS, raw athletic score, film, and all these different resources that we have at our disposal. Not just scouts and, team front offices, but like the media, the fans, like we all have access to it now. And yet it still feels like we're just recycling the same talking points every single year. And I don't know. It drives me nuts. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we'll wrap up this week of shows, getting into some potential picks the Eagles could make with a 32nd overall selection that would shock the world. Like a pick that you're just, it's somewhat realistic, but you're not expecting it at all. But Howie Roseman could do it because he's done things like this before. He has shocked Eagles fans and the NFL world before. I'll get into 4 different ideas coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, guys, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Howie Roseman, there's certain things you can bank on with Howie. Like, he's going to draft linemen early in the draft. Like, he's going to do all he can to support his quarterback with weapons. But also something you can expect is, and at this point, you can expect him to add Georgia Bulldogs. Like, that's something you can expect as well. But you can also expect him to be predictably unpredictable. Like, every year, he does things differently. And I do feel like the draft can back that up. Like, I think last year proves that. He took a Toledo cornerback with the first pick that he had in the first round. He took another corner from Iowa in the second round. He had never taken a corner in the first round before that. He had only taken one second-round corner in his career, selecting Sidney Jones in 2017. But last year, he took 2 corners in a row. Like, that's something we're not used to. He took a quarterback in the second round in 2020 when he had just paid a quarterback a $100 million long-term extension. So I think one thing you can predict about Howie this year is that he will be predictably unpredictable. And I do want to get a little bit radical here. I have some suggestions for the 32nd overall pick that he could consider that you just would not expect. But I do think it is possible. Because of how complete the Eagles roster is, they don't have they have some, but they don't have a lot of short-term, long-term real needs, holes that are open on this team. I do think this pick, I don't want to say it's a luxury pick, but, having that BPA versus need discussion, the Eagles might have the flexibility to say we can stick here and take the best player available because we don't have a lot of openings. Like, we might as well just go for the value. They could also get creative and maybe go for certain specific roles or try to make a good position already elite, make it the best position in the league. It might not be a need, but adding another guy to that position would just make you unstoppable for the time being. I do think they have that kind of flexibility. Here are 4 players they could take with that pick if they did not trade up or down that would just, I think, have your jaw dropped. The first one, and again, I'm not predicting these aren't super realistic, but it's again, Howie Roseman doing what he does and shocking the world. This year, he handed out an extension to a linebacker and a running back. So I think it's crazy to say what Howie's going to do, whether it's through free agency, trades, or the draft. The first pick, and again, I don't think this would be smart. This isn't what I'm suggesting. Ohio State running back Travion Henderson. Could you imagine if Howie said, let's just go all in on the approach we had last year. We had the best rushing attack in the history of the NFL. Let's just and I know Saquon Barkley just got an extension. I don't think this would be a smart draft pick. But what if he's trying to be innovative, trying to be different? And on offense this year, they had this idea of using more 2 running back sets. What if, Dallas Goedert gets traded and they don't really add another impactful tight end and they just go young there with Kalen and Bryant and Calcaterra, and they just kind of forget tight end and they run it with Smith, Brown, Dotson, and then you have 2 running backs. Maybe you run more 22 personnel, 21 personnel with, instead of 2 tight ends out there, you have 2 running backs. What if there's a triple option implemented in the offense, like Cam Newton's Carolina Panthers back in 2015, or even before that, where there were times they had both Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams out there? What if they just said, we're going all in on this run-first approach? This would absolutely piss off A.J. Brown, I think, for sure. But what if they just said Travion Henderson is the pick? What if, I doubt it. I think he's a top 10 selection. But for any sort of scenario where Ashton Genty was there at 32, do you think Howie, they would have to think about it for a second, right? There's no way they do this, but that would shock the world. But I'm just trying to think of, again, innovative, different ways they're going to try to be creative on offense. And that's an idea. It's an idea. I'm not saying it's a good one, but again, this is shock value picks they could make with that 32nd overall selection that I don't think are completely off the table. Another one that I kind of had a similar suggestion last year for a Texas burner, a deep threat to add to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, now Jahan Dotson. If you are looking for a niche role for this offense, something, again, be creative, add more to this offense you don't have. A.J. Brown is a great deep threat. So is Devontae Smith. Explosive plays. Dotson showed last year he can be that guy too. The big catch against Jacksonville, the big receptions against Kansas City in the Super Bowl. But they don't have a burner, a deep threat that runs a sub 4.3. What if they took Matthew Golden from Texas, who I believe was under a 4.3 in his 40 time at the Texas Pro Day, at the Big 12 Pro Day? What if they just said, we're going to go for this kind of role player. We're going to add our version of Xavier Worthy. And hopefully he's a higher character prospect than Worthy, as we all know what happened this offseason. Matthew Golden is an idea where it's totally a luxury pick. You have 3 receivers under contract for at least 2 years each. And for Smith and Brown, it's longer than that. But what if they said, let's add another, again, maybe they're not going to replace Dallas Goedert in the traditional sense with another tight end. What if they want to add another receiver? And maybe you run more 4 receiver sets. You go a lot of empty sets, spreading things out for Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. I think Jalen Hurts a lot of the time plays better when it's not condensed sets. 12 personnel, I don't always think that's what's best for Jalen. I think he's a better player when things are spread out. That's the one thing I did like that Brian Johnson did a lot in 2023, and I do think early on in the year it was working for Jalen. What if they said, let's go get our new Deshaun Jackson burner? and they take Matthew Golden with that pick, and then say we'll deal with the defensive line with our next few selections in the second and third round. Again, not something that I'm predicting, but Matthew Golden in Philly would definitely shock the NFL world. Another Texas player, too, at the cornerback position, Jahdae Barron. What if they said, we've got Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, but we saw last year what having 3 shutdown corners can do for this defense. In a year where they lost pass rushers, they're going to be even younger on the defensive line. They'll be without Nakobe Dean for the first half of the year, most likely. What if they say, and they're not convinced on Sidney Brown at safety, what if they say, let's go with more corners, more defensive back heavy packages? Jahdae Barron is a player that I think projects to corner at the next level, but he's a playmaker. And he does have a thin frame. Maybe you move him around as the safety corner tweener, and him and Cooper DeJean are your Swiss Army knives on defense. What if they just go all in on this? Again, I wouldn't do it because I'm not taking a first-round player if I know I'm not giving them a second contract, and there's no way they're paying 3 corners $30+ million a year if this panned out. But maybe the Eagles aren't thinking that way. Maybe they see 4 to 5 really good years of a player, and then who knows what happens with the other guys as a good pick. Again, these are all luxury suggestions, but Jahdae Barron would certainly be one that I think shocks everyone. And it is technically a need right now. Depends on how you believe in Keely Ringo, but I don't think Adoree Jackson really moves the meter for people. So that's another option. And then my fourth one is Alabama linebacker Jahad Campbell. This one I've suggested in the past. I really like Nakobe Dean. I think he's a part of the Eagles' future, but the Eagles did pay 1 linebacker in Zach Bond. Do we think Howie's going to pay 2? Nakobe Dean eventually will need a new contract. He's heading into, I believe this is his last year on his rookie deal. He's been in the NFL now this is year 4. Are they going to pay 2 linebackers an extension, especially coming off a serious injury? Or do they let Nakobe Dean walk next year and they say we have Jahad Campbell for 4 to 5 years as an inexpensive star next to Zach Bond? Look at that kind of length and range. You missed out on a guy like Edgerrin Cooper last year that I really wanted. Don't know if he was on the Eagles' radar. But Jahad Campbell, of all these picks, Travion Henderson, Matthew Golden, Jahdae Barron, I think Jahad Campbell actually is the most realistic, which is crazy to say because it's a linebacker in the first round. But I think if he were to fall, that would make the most sense of these shock value picks Howie could make. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting. You never know with Howie Roseman. Odds are none of these players, none of these positions are the selection. It's likely going to be defensive line or offensive line, maybe tight end. But I don't think you'll see a skill position or a defensive back unless it's a safety like a Malachi Starks or Nick Emenwari with that 32nd overall pick. But again, you never know with Howie. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen each and every day. We'll be back on Monday for Mock Draft Monday. Until then, thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.